and welcome. I am Britta Dornan, and on behalf of Global Genes, it is my pleasure to welcome you to a wonderful session called My Sister's Keeper, Siblings, Stories, and Life on the Sidelines. So for reference, I am a rare disease patient. I author a blog called lymphedemadiary.com, and I am Senior Director of Communications and Marketing at the EveryLife Foundation for Rare Diseases. It's my pleasure to moderate the panel today, and our hope for today's conversation is that whether you are a sibling of someone with a rare disease, or you are a parent, or you have a rare disease and so does your sibling, whatever your perspective and your story and experience is, that this conversation helps to give you insights that maybe you hadn't considered, or maybe it gives you, you hear things that you relate to. And we're also hoping that this conversation is an opportunity to think about how the community can better support rare disease siblings, and what does that look like. And so today, it's amazing, the panel that we have put together, because we represent various possible scenarios. The situation where a sibling has a rare disease and the other doesn't, a situation where both siblings have the same rare disease, and where siblings have different rare diseases. So we have quite a mix, and I represent the last example, and so I will share with you. Boom! This is me and my siblings. So if you couldn't guess, I'm the one on the far left of both pictures, and the picture on the left is circa 1977, I believe, and apparently I have returned to that haircut. And the little guy in the middle is my older brother, and the one on the far right is my older sister. And I was, and the picture on the right is from one of our sibling summits, our get-togethers. This one's from a few years back. So I have primary lymphedema that first presented when I was 13, but didn't really come on until I was 23. And from my sister, she has a rare disease. She also has primary lymphedema, which didn't present in her until she was in her late 20s. And she also has neurofibromatosis type 2, which is why I'm wearing my I Know a Fighter NF t-shirt today to support my sibling. So she came down with, she presented with NF2 when she was 16, but then it was really later in her 20s when we really knew what it was and that she had a rare disease. So my experience with siblings and rare disease is as an adult. So that's where I'm coming from. And so let me introduce you to some other very special person here with us today, Madison McLaughlin. Now, Madison is well known in our community and quite an advocate for rare disease. And she is an actor. You may have seen her on the CW's Arrow, on Chicago PD, Supernatural. You got to go to IMDb to look her up and really see for, the full breadth. But the role that Madison plays, that we are most interested in discussing today, is that of being sister to two girls with rare disease. So Madison, if you wouldn't mind telling us about these wonderful women and girls that we see in these pictures.
Of course. Oh my gosh, what an introduction, Britta. Thank you. So yeah, hi, I'm Madison. This is I just did some quick math, which is a big thing for me. I went into acting, so I never had to do math ever again. This is my 6th Global Genes Summit. And I am so happy that we found this community. This has been life-changing for us as a family. So I will go ahead and get into it. These are my sisters. They are the lights of my whole world. I'm the oldest. Although if you looked at a picture of us now, if you look at that one in the middle and the bottom, I mean, you wouldn't know it. They're really, I'm getting the questions now where they're like, oh, are you guys all around the same age? To which I respond, yes, I am a teenager, which is a lie. I haven't been a teenager for several years. But if you look at the picture on the bottom middle, Marin is on the far left. She's the youngest. She's our baby. She just turned 15. And then next to her is our sister Mallory, who is 17. And then there's me. And then there is Marissa, who is 19, almost 20 somehow. What's really special about today actually is September 29th, 2002. So exactly today, but in 2002 is when Marissa first started showing symptoms of having rare disease. And we were told that day in the hospital that we should treat every day like Christmas because she wouldn't make it to see December. And here we are, September 29th, 2021, and she has already given me a Christmas list of presents that she wants. So we really love proving people wrong in our family, as I'm sure a lot of people in the rare disease world can attest to. After several years, finally in 2013, we got a diagnosis for Marissa and Marin. They are two of less than 25 people in the world diagnosed with their rare disease. It is a leukodystrophy. We call it HBSL because the real name is very, very long. It's hypomyelination of the brainstem and spinal cord with spasticity in the lower limbs. So it's quite the mouthful. So we call it HBSL. And we have started our own foundation, which we went public with almost a year ago, last November, called the MacPac Foundation. And our whole goal with that foundation is to, of course, raise money for research, because as we all know, that is something that we really need to do in the rare disease community. But we have a really big emphasis on also supporting families. And we are in the process of implementing programs to support caregivers and siblings as well. So that is a little bit about me, and I hope I didn't talk too long, but there you have it.
Are you kidding? No, we could keep listening to you, Madison.
Oh gosh, because I will just talk and talk and talk.
Well, happy 19-year anniversary for Marissa. And yes, we are the community of underdogs. So we love to see that. And so now I would like to introduce our other two in the group here today. And that's Maisy and Mallory Seer. So Mallory is an accomplished public health professional who has a master's degree in public health from Boston University. And Maisy is an experienced advocate who's working on her master's of social work. And she has a goal, which I think is just wonderful, which is to open a private practice to support people with disabilities in an area that is not focused on enough, I would guess, Maisy, and that's navigating personal relationships and intimacy. And the two of them are quite the powerhouse on the podcast with Mais and Mal. So go and subscribe on your phones right now as this is going on, because it's really wonderful. And that's a great place to pick up on this conversation after this session about the relationship between rare siblings. So I'll hand it over to the two of you.
Thanks so much, Britta. Hi, everybody. My name is Mallory. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I have a rare disease called microvillus inclusion disease. It impacts the small intestine and impacts the process of digestion. So both Maisy and I rely heavily for our nutrition on TPN, which means we get hooked up to an IV infusion every night. It's how we've lived our entire lives. I think it's really important to mention that the perspective that we bring is having this diagnosis since birth. And I think that's another topic that isn't really discussed enough within the rare disease community, about the idea of having a diagnosis since birth and having a later onset in life. So Maisy and I will be sharing very different narratives during this presentation, but overall, what we like to talk about is that we have always lived our lives to the fullest, very much like Madison talked about. We are extremely close, we are very celebratory, and I have a very, very full life. I'm married. I live in Colorado. I'm a dog mom. I have a full-time job in health policy with an amazing national organization. And in my free time, I do public speaking, blogging, podcasting, all of those things to just really share my story and the story of our family and how we have thrived with a very difficult diagnosis where most patients are told they will not live. So with that, I will hand it over to Maisy to share a little bit about her, and then we're really looking forward to having this rich conversation with everybody on the panel. Maisy?
Thank you. Yeah. So as Britta and Mal said, I have the same diagnosis, microvillus inclusion disease. Mine was a little bit of a later onset, and because of being a rare sibling, they sort of knew to look for that because it's a genetic disorder. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we dive in further. But there were some side effects that I avoided as a result of them being more prepared for my diagnosis. So yeah, one thing that we really promote on our podcast and in our lives is our family always says it's not if, but how. So not if we're going to do something, but how are we going to find a way to do it, despite the obstacles and challenges that we may have to overcome in order to do so. And that's sort of how we've always lived our lives. So as they mentioned, I am also going to school for my Master of Social Work degree. I would like to pursue certification as a sex therapist, specifically to work with people who have rare genetic disorders, physical and cognitive disabilities, and really dig into those romantic relationships and the conversations around sex and intimacy that most people are uncomfortable having. I think there's a real lack of resources and dialogue. It's starting to get a little bit better, but that's really my professional goal. And we started our podcast because we wanted to sort of dig into those deeper topics that we felt weren't being talked about, and we wanted a place to share our story. So we're really excited to present together for the first time in a really long time. And we thank you guys all for attending.
Wonderful, amazing, and inspiring. Let me stop the slides here. All right, well, thank you all for introducing yourselves. So now I'd like to ask Madison, a question's come to my mind, and that is, growing up in a family with 4 siblings, that's a full house and a lot going on right there.
Oh, and that's not even counting all the animals we have. It was
How many animals? How many animals?
House. Oh yeah.
All right. So very full house.
Mm-hmm.
2 of your siblings have rare disease. So how can you tell us? I know this is tough, but can you tell us and describe to us how that impacted you, and particularly the choices that you made in your life and the path that you've chosen?
Well, for starters, if anybody here is a fan of the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs personality types, I am a type 2 INFJ. So it has quite literally impacted every part of my personality, I think. My friends would say I'm 25, and my friend groups, it's like, we'll go out, we'll do things, obviously everything. But we would go out, and I was always the friend who was the mom friend, is what everybody called me. Like, I have a big car because it fits both of my sister's wheelchairs. And I'm always the mom that has I'm the friend who always has like a first aid kit. I always have extra water bottles. I'm like very much so. I would say one of the biggest parts of my identity has been my role as a caregiver. And that was something that I didn't really put a label to, or like a word to, until the last couple of years in therapy, actually, because I was like, I don't know why I feel like I'm always taking care of people, and I feel like I can't allow other people to take care of me. And my therapist was like, well, let's unpack it. And I think one of the interesting things, especially as my sisters have gotten older, because now they're all, like older teenagers now, they're not little babies anymore, has been really finding that line of like, okay, where do I fall? I'm not a parent, but I am very involved. I bring my sisters every month to their IVIG, which is a 3-day whole saga in the hospital for treatment. And I am the one who brings them for that. So I'm very involved in their care, but I'm still their sister. So there's been a lot of like, okay, who am I as their sister outside of their caregiver, but also like, who am I as a person outside of taking care of people? And that's something that other siblings that I've talked to, we talk a lot about. There's this term called glass children that was coined fairly recently, actually, and it basically means it's to talk about like a typically developing sibling in a dynamic where there's also kids who are disabled. And the term glass children comes from the fact that those siblings are often looked straight through. And so that's something that we've talked a lot about as a family too, for me and my sister Mallory, how we can still like have, I guess, experiences growing up and things with my sisters and as individuals that aren't directly linked to being caregivers.
Just as a follow-up, Madison, just to prod you a little bit more on this topic, you have developed a career in and out, separate from rare disease. You're a successful actor. So you found a way to carve out space and time for that. And to make that happen, can you just tell us a little bit about that, about how you did that?
It was something I always wanted to do. I was the theater kid, right? Like that's who I was. And then when Marissa was first kind of showing signs and symptoms before we even had a diagnosis for her, my mom was very intentional about including me in every part of her care. I was never really sheltered from any of the prognoses or like anything like that. But she was also very intentional about making sure that, as important as it was that we get to these appointments and therapies and things from Marissa, that it was equally as important that I was still committed and going to like rehearsals and acting class and things like that. And then as I got older, honestly, that just kind of came down to like the way I was raised and the way that my sisters were. Like my sisters to this day help me tape auditions and they'll drive with me to set and stuff like that. And they're very involved. I'm producing some projects now and some things that Marissa and Marin will actually star in as well. So I've kind of like made it a family affair. It's kind of impossible for me to have anything that's taking up a huge part of my life that I don't include them in, just because that's just how we are as a family. We're very close. But yeah, I mean, even it was honestly very hard, like doing my first time that I was living away from them, it was to do a show, and I was living in Chicago and then in Vancouver. And it was the first time that I had gone more than a week without seeing them. And it was a very challenging and weird time. But that's something that, they were always very, very, and even more than supportive, I would say very encouraging. And I would be like, oh, maybe I should turn this thing down because it would put me being away for so long. And my sisters were the first ones to be like, no, you're crazy. You have to do this like TV show and go and tell us all about it. And they were always the first ones to make sure that I was still carving out that space,
That's beautiful. That not only are you their caregiver, but they were a caregiver to you too, Madison.
Oh yeah, they are all the time. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So Mallory and Maisy, the two of you grew up 8 years apart, 8 years age difference, with the same rare genetic condition, but you're two very individual people. So what was that like? How was it the same or different for the two of you?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to preface this conversation with we all have M names, and all of Madison's sisters have M names. So I am a different Mallory than the Mallory that Madison is talking about, but we love all the M names. So just for clarity. So I am, to my knowledge, the oldest living person with my rare genetic condition, microvillus inclusion disease. And when I was diagnosed in the late-ish 80s, there were a lot of unknowns still. And it took a long time for me to be diagnosed. And we went to all kinds of hospitals and all kinds of specialty clinics, and we're searching for answers. And I highly encourage you to go to our podcast and listen to the 2 episodes we did with our incredible mother, because she really dives into the diagnostic journey that both of us had, because obviously we don't really remember. But for me, when I was navigating early treatment, there were some things that were missed, and there were some mistakes that were made early on. So as a result, my disability is more physical. My height is impaired. I'm only not quite 4 feet tall. And so that was some added challenges that I had growing up. And when I was younger, I always wanted a sister. So I think it's very important to mention that I personally requested Maisy's presence. And obviously, it was a little bit complicated having a rare disease, because we knew that there would be a risk that a sibling would have the same condition. But we also knew that our family was not yet complete. And so that was met with, I will say, less than warm thoughts and feelings from the medical community. But we went on, and my mom had Maisy, and we're so, so grateful. And during her early years, we were very aware, and I say we, I was 8 years old, but I knew what was going on. But we were very aware that there was a high chance she would also have MID. So we were all very alert, and she did have health issues early on. When she was diagnosed, we were able to be more on top of some of the things that were missed in my early treatment. And so she has had less, I would say, less intense onset, and also less of the physical implications. And when I was growing up, I had an incredible community that just wrapped its arms around me. I was so close with my entire class. Our small town community knew our family. We had fundraisers when I had major surgery. It was unbelievable. I mean, just the support that I had growing up. For the most part, my teachers were very supportive. We had a few off that, thought about accommodations and different things. And so, that was my experience. I was always an advocate. I was always educating in order to build awareness about, why my physical situation was different, or why I didn't eat as much at lunch, or why I might be out sick for periods of time. And as I got older, those presentations to my class sort of evolved. And it got to the point where my classmates were educating other people so that I sort of didn't have to. And we were all just the shared support system. And so when Maisy came along, we were in the same neighborhood, the same school system, all of these different things. And her journey was very different. But I'll let her speak more to that.
Yeah, so being the second sibling with that diagnosis, they were sort of like I had said in the intro, a little bit more prepared. But one thing that's interesting about this diagnosis is that it is sort of an invisible illness. We sort of throw that term around, which means if you look at me, you probably wouldn't assume that there's anything wrong with me or that I have any sort of complex medical needs at all. And so growing up, I was very active. I was very involved in extracurriculars. I was always doing a million things at once. And sometimes that meant that I needed to access those accommodations too, but it looked a little bit different. So it definitely wasn't as well received when I tried to access accommodations if I needed an extension on an assignment. And around middle school specifically, I had a real struggle with one teacher who just didn't believe me. I had documentation. I had notes from my mom. My mom baked the teacher's muffins, and we had a whole meeting about it. And I ended up I think I ended with a D or an F in her class because she refused to give me work ahead of time when I was out sick from trying to do too much. And that really sort of shaped my identity in a big way. And Madison touched on sort of the importance of developing that identity. And I think as somebody with a rare disease, I've tried really hard to not make it a part of my life at all. And that resulted in me continuing to try to do too much without asking for the help that I needed because I was afraid I wouldn't be believed or supportive. And that went all the way through to college, really, until I started seeing a counselor there and talking about that identity piece. So I think that's been really interesting to see kind of the juxtaposition between how society has sort of perceived our same diagnosis, but presenting very differently. And I think how it's shaped our journeys in life, our career paths, our the network connections that we've made, the relationships we've formed. I think it's been a really interesting way to see those differences, but also be sort of a support system for each other during that time because it was so different. So yeah, that was kind of my experience. Obviously, I've worked through some of that and have an amazing support system now. But the same diagnosis can look very different and lead to very different experiences.
Yeah, I find this fascinating because we had a question come into the chat about how do you approach and support a sibling that is in denial about their condition. Now, I'm not categorizing Maisy as you being in denial. I'm not putting something on you. This is their words, but I do find it a connection here that Maisy, you were treated as though you didn't have the disease, and so you, from what I understand, it was as though you were saying to yourself you didn't have it, so you weren't doing what you needed to do to care for yourself, and you found your way into counseling. And so my question is, how did that happen? Did Mallory have a hand in that? Do your parents? What made you get to that point where you're ready for counseling?
I think it was just sort of the mounting frustration of trying to balance it all, because obviously, in college, I still had to set up my IV tubing. And I'm going to pass this one back to Mal in just a second, but I was trying to do sort of everything myself, and I was getting really frustrated. And it didn't necessarily present as like an existential crisis or a breakdown or anything like that. It was just, I feel like I am not doing and being everything that people expect me to do and be. And why is that? There's this piece that's missing. And, being a student on campus, you have those counseling services to access. So I think it was just sort of that frustration that was building. And I did end up in the hospital at one point, not necessarily because I had done anything wrong or wasn't managing my care well, but that was sort of part of a wake-up call where I was like, okay, should I be taking less classes? How can I be better communicating with my professors? And not even necessarily asking for big accommodations, but just opening those lines of communication and starting to be a little bit more honest with myself and my professors. And my family was super supportive during that time. And Mal was always a huge source of support during my college experience. But really, it just took me being ready to have that conversation and say, I want to do it all and I can't, but how can I continue to do as much as possible and stay healthy? But we do have a podcast episode about our different college experiences and asking for help when you need it. So Mal, I don't know if you want to add to that or just sort of throw it to that episode.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that really quickly. I think I also had, a significant turning point in college. And a lot of the work I've done professionally has been focused on those with complex medical needs or disabilities transitioning to adulthood. And I think it's such an important time in life to be able to have those difficult conversations and navigate managing your health. And I went away to college also And I really took the natural supports we had both had growing up really for granted. We had nursing support. I had a paraprofessional in school. We just always had people helping us. And it was so organic that when I went away to school, I was like, oh, I can do this. And of course, we were working with my parents really closely, and I would go home on the weekends so I could see Maisy, and because we were so close. But I also had that wake up call of where I tried to do everything, and I was not getting the social interaction that I needed. And my mental health really struggled to the point where I had to do some serious reflection about if I could go away to school. This was the first time where I was coming up against I don't know if I can do this. And that was new for me. Everything had come so easy. And Maisy and I talk all the time about part of why I think people don't understand the extent of our medical complexities is because we make it look easy. We talk about a lot about this in terms of social media, in terms of, disclosure about your illness, because we are so, it's just second nature to us. We just do all the things until we can't. And so I think recognizing where your health and your rare disease fits into the things that you're trying to do, sometimes it's a conversation you need to have with yourself.
Definitely the theme that, one theme here is just, it is the differences in experiences in getting help and helping yourself. I think that something else I'd like to touch on is the differences in being ready and willing to share. We are in a world where, especially with teenage sisters, Madison, it's share mode, social media. What do you do when the siblings are in a different place, when they're ready about talking publicly about the disease? Like, if, for example, I am in a different place than my sister in sharing on social media that, I work in rare disease. I want everyone, the mailman, I want everyone to know about my rare disease. And that's not her preference currently. And I have to respect that and be aware of that. And I was made aware when I posted something on social media recently, and she had to ding me wait, that's LinkedIn. I'm not cool with my professional peeps knowing about that. She had untagged me, and I had to walk it back and be more cognizant. I thought I have to be more careful about this because it's not my story to share, right? It's not just my story, but it bleeds. So I don't know if, Madison, if you had this experience, these different siblings, you must not all be in the same exact place in terms of being ready to talk publicly.
Yeah, I think it's something really interesting too, being, and seeing their generation. I grew up with social media. They're definitely growing up with social media. And it's something that I try to have a very open conversation with them, and kind of especially now with the foundation, which is so deeply personal. We called it the MacPac Foundation, which is how my mom signs our Christmas cards, is as the MacPac. So it could not possibly get more personal. That being said, it is terrifying as it is to be a teenager, as we can all attest to. It is 1,000 times more terrifying to be a teenager on social media, where every single thing that you post lives forever. Even if you delete it, it's already out there. And so, especially in my line of work, where for some reason, a lot of people have taken a liking to following me on social media. So I try to be very respectful of finding that balance of, okay, I want to use this platform that I've been really gifted with to talk about this rare disease community that I feel can use all the microphones and hands on deck that we can get. But I also want to respect the privacy of my sisters who, are starting college and are having their own social circles. And it's been really interesting to see my two sisters that have the rare disease within the last year or two. they have been very intentional about turning to social media to follow certain advocates and influencers within the disability space. And so it's been really interesting for me to see them kind of really come into their own identity and kind of claim that as a part of them instead of something that they deal with. It's just become a part of their identity that they're actually very proud of, because it is, you know, their disability is a huge part of what makes them them. And I've learned a lot from how they have really used in social media to really learn a lot about advocacy. And then I just ask them before I post anything. It's a communication where it's like, okay, are you okay with me posting this picture of you? Can I post your face? Or would you rather it just be like kind of blurred or maybe in the background? Or we do photo approval, you know, and kind of talking about like, is it okay for me to tag them or and like link to their accounts, things like that. And I think it's something that's just always evolving, you know, as they get older and as social media evolves, because it's become such a, especially them being immunocompromised for the last year and a half, it's really been the only communication that they have with the outside world. So it's definitely evolved a lot over the last year.
Madison, I'd like to come back to you in a minute with this question, but Mallory and Maisy, could you talk to us about, there's a lot of parents watching today, and so I'd like for you to speak to what your parents have done that have helped support the two of you, and what any thoughts or that you'd like to convey.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. And then I know we had quite a few thoughts on the social media and disclosure topic too, which is so pertinent right now. In our growing up, our parents have been nothing but supportive of everything that we've wanted to do. And I know we talked about early on, you know, it's not if we can do it, but how. And they just constantly were figuring things out and, you know, figuring out how we could make things work. But they also let us try things. They let us try hard things. They let us take risks. You know, Maisy used to do horseback riding, gymnastics. I took dance for 7 years. We both went away to college. We both have our driver's license. I know when I have spoken to groups of disabled youth, you know, I've had young people come up to me and say, I didn't even think I could go to college. And now I feel like that's something that, you know, I can explore and look into too. And I know that had to be hard for my parents. We're all very close. And I remember when I wanted to move to Boston to go to grad school, my husband has disabilities as well. And we just went. It was hard. It was scary. We navigated everything you can possibly imagine as a couple who was newly living together. But we were supported and we learned and we did it. And I graduated and got my master's. And I think the only way to know what's possible is to be able to take those risks. And, you know, we've always had very open communication, you know, about our health. And, you know, if we're doing something that, you know, may not be medical advice, it's like, yeah, but we're aware. And we're just really firm practitioners of dignity at risk and living our lives the best way possible, because, you know, like Madison said, like, you never know how many birthdays or Christmases you're going to have. So why miss out on the things that bring you joy? Because of, you know, we could all die tragically tomorrow, rare disease or not. So, you know, we've always just been those people who live life the way that we want. And it's, I don't know, one thing we talk about, and then I'll wrap up, is when Maisy and I think back on our childhood, even though we've experienced years and decades of medical appointments and surgeries and trauma, those aren't the things we remember. We remember going camping. We remember having sleepovers. We remember friends coming to visit us in the hospital, and, you know, the Disney Channel that we only got when we were in a certain hospital. Like, we just don't think about the negative things because there have been so many positive experiences that we've shared as a family.
Madison, we have 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure, Madison, I'd love to get your thoughts on your reflections on how your parents, I know you've talked a lot about your mom, and how did she make sure that you didn't feel left out? I mean, with all 4 girls, how did she do that? And that was a question that came in from our viewers. And then also the 2-parter here is, what do you believe our healthcare organizations can do better to support rare siblings? Because I know you've done work in that area.
I think I'll start by saying, I think the best thing, I think it's a tie. The 2 best things that my mom ever did for us as siblings was make sure we were all in therapy. That has individual and family therapy. I mean, look at my Instagram and you'll see how much I believe in therapy. I talk about it all the time because it has changed my life and our life as a family. So I think that really being intentional about that maintenance of keeping yourself okay, especially in a world where not a lot of people get it, I think is very important. So that's been a huge thing. The other thing was that we were always included. Mallory and I, my sister Mallory, and I were always very included in doctor visits and appointments. My sisters never went into an MRI or a surgery or an EKG or any type of infusions without us as siblings understanding what it was and why it was happening. And she also kept a very open dialogue. So we would be sitting with, like the top orthopedic surgeon in the country. And my mom would be like, excuse me, my daughter has a question. And we'd be like, yeah, why are you putting nails in my sister? Things like that. And as basic as the questions were when we were little to now, as they're a lot more complex as we learn more about their rare disease and as we get older, I always felt like my mom really carved out a safe space for us to ask. There were no dumb questions, and it was important for us because as much as you as a parent have all of these, fears and kind of like this unknown, your kids are experiencing that too, but they're kids. And so a lot of times they don't know how to articulate that. So I think having that safe space to talk about it was very important. And then something that we did as a family was we really worked with some departments at our local hospital that we go to. And I don't know, I'm sure people watching are familiar with children's hospitals. You go to a children's hospital and typically, with my family, I have 2 sisters in wheelchairs. And then there's me and my sister Mallory who are pushing the wheelchairs. And we would get stopped every single time right by the entrance. And there would be volunteers giving Marissa and Marin books, board games, teddy bears, whatever it is. And Mallory and I were quite literally glass children standing in the back, and the volunteers wouldn't so much as speak to us, let us alone, give us a teddy bear or something, which was really interesting because Mallory is right between Marissa and Marin age-wise. And so that can really start placing this idea of like, oh, does this mean that, who are we invisible? Can people see through us? And so we worked with our local hospital so that now the program and the protocol is that every volunteer addresses every child that's there, whether they have a visible disability, an invisible disability, or they're there as a rare sibling.
That's amazing. That is something I think to be further explored, the program that you set up. And I just want to acknowledge, as we have a minute left here, I do want to acknowledge the theme of mental health care, maintenance, therapy, counseling. I heard that come up a lot. And so I do want to acknowledge that and say that that's something that could be explored more. And perhaps by subscribing to the Mais and Mal podcast, you learn more about that. And by following Madison on social media, you can witness and explore these themes more. So I encourage everyone to do that. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Mallory, Madison, and Maisy. That was incredible.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.